We are going to discuss life's winners, top sports people, tycoons, thinkers and so on. Is their success a matter of individual genius working through? Emphatically not, says Malcolm Gladwell, author of The Tipping Point, in his new book, Outliers. Malcolm, let's just start by defining what an outlier is.
It is someone who lies outside of ordinary experience, so someone on the fringes. Someone on the fringes,
and in this case, generally speaking, somebody who has done extraordinarily well or has a very, very high IQ, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm interested in those people who we would turn to really learn something meaningful about success.
And it wouldn't be too much, would it, to say that this book is a blast against the idea of the individual lone genius?
It is, very much. It's about the ecology of success. It's about how much more you learn about the successful when you look around them as opposed to at them.
One of the examples, there are so many things we could talk about, but you yourself start off looking at hockey players, ice hockey players in Canada, and you ran down the list of all the top people and you found they were all born in 2 months.
January, February and March, yes.
Yeah, 3 months.
And the same is true, by the way, of football in Europe. That the rosters of elite sports teams are overwhelmingly filled with people born in those months because the eligibility dates for age class football and hockey is January 1st. And so when they look for the most talented young players when they're 8 and 9 years old to recruit into all-star teams and give special coaching, they think they're choosing the most talented children. They're in fact choosing the biggest children because at that age, being born in the first part of the year is a huge advantage. So they choose these children born in January and February under thinking they're the best. They're in fact just the biggest. Give them special coaching and lots of practice until they are the best.
So there is a very important statistical advantage. And you find, I suppose, an analogous one with tycoons from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so I got very interested. Once I saw that, I thought, well, look, can we find patterns in the lives of successful people all over the place? So then I looked at the richest people in Silicon Valley, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, a guy named Bill Joy, who's the one who really wrote the software for the internet, the CEO of Google, on and on and on, and found they are overwhelmingly born in 1955. And the reason is that the personal computer revolution happened in 1976, and there is an enormous advantage to being 21 when the revolution hit. And that is you're old enough to be able to follow the revolution. You're not in school, but you're young enough not to have been part of the previous paradigm. You don't already have your job with IBM and a mortgage so you have this little window where people are given an extraordinary advantage if they happen to be the right age at that moment.
And of course, with the advantage, they then have to be bright, not necessarily super bright, but bright enough in your terminology.
To take advantage of it.
And then they have to work hard.
Yes.
There's a 10,000-hour rule that you also discuss.
Yeah, 10,000-hour rule is this notion that comes from expertise researchers that says that to be good at something complex takes about 10,000 hours, which roughly translates to 10 years if you think of working at it 4 hours a day.
And this would be true of a Mozart or certainly a concert pianist, as of a scientist.
It's almost impossible to find any cognitively complex discipline that does not follow the 10,000-hour rule. And what that says then is that those who are good are very often good because they had been given an opportunity to get their 10,000 hours in. So again, it's not about the special pluck and genius of the gifted person. It's being put in a situation where you can work harder than your peers and reach that magical level before they can.
So it's about when you're born, both in terms of the year and the year you're born. It's about hard work. But there are also very important cultural issues here. And one of the many examples in the book, but I thought a very interesting one, was this endless debate about why so many Asian people, particularly Chinese people, seem to be so good at maths.
Yeah, we've observed this gap, and it's enormous, between Western school children and Asian children in mathematics for quite some time. And it forces an explanation. And my explanation is, I think it's cultural, and I think it has to do with attitudes towards work. And that countries that have a history with rice agriculture, which is the most cognitively and labor-intensive agriculture known to man.
Well, I knew it was hard work. I hadn't realised how difficult it was intellectually to grow rice.
Oh, it's demanding in a way. I mean, my European peasant forebears worked 1,000 hours a year and basically drank from noon on. and hibernated in the winter, right? Their counterparts in China were working 3,000 hours a year, were working all day long, 7 days a week, and were forced to master all kinds of things that my peasant forebears wouldn't even,
details of drainage, all hundreds of different varieties of rice, wall building, and so on.
It's fantastically complex. I mean, you have to. I went to China and actually, was walked through a rice paddy, and you have no idea how complicated it is. And the notion is that if you do that as a culture for 1,000 years, when you sit down at 15 years of age in 2008 in front of a calculus problem, you think about it, you approach it in a very different way than you do if you come from a culture that has no history of grappling with these labor-intensive, cognitively complex problems.
Yeah. Now, at this point, I suppose some people will say, well, this is rather a despairing conclusion, because if you are your culture, then whether it's a bit like genetic determinism, you're stuck. But there is a sort of uplifting example in this book about school children from sort of ethnically disadvantaged areas of, I think, Chicago.
New York,
South Bronx in New York.
Yeah,
and the point there is simply that during the long summer holiday, people from more disadvantaged backgrounds fall back far more than people who've got books and parents keeping them going in the summer.
Yes, and you give. So this idea, if we think about a lot of these ideas, we can redesign educational programs for poor kids. And what's happened, the most successful of these in the United States is a program that simply says, can we use Asian ideas in American classrooms? That is, can we extend the school day, extend the school year, give children a chance to get their 10,000 hours of schoolwork in, poor children, before they want to go to college? And the answer is, yes, you can do that. And children can kind of shake off their cultural legacy and embrace another cultural legacy that's about work.
If they go to a school which makes them work harder for longer.
Which gives them an opportunity and a kind of the motivation to work harder for longer. So I don't think there's a critical distinction between genetic determinism, which really is determinism, and cultural determinism, which is only deterministic if you don't face up to the culture and don't try and replace it.
And not be too squeamish about talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I find the reluctance with which we will talk about cultural specifics to be quite baffling. It's
Sima, what did you make of this?
Look, you also speak about ecology of failure in your book, because the plane crash, for example, which is a riveting chapter. I wonder whether this should not be put into some kind of policy, because what you were saying is that the plane crash of Korean Airlines and Avianca was due to a certain, not only language, but also a certain cultural attitude whereby the co-pilot is differential to the captain does not really understand ground control. It just crossed my mind that it might be worth, for example, having, for planes landing in the United States, always an American crew. I mean, you're quite right.
We should explain. I mean, it is a gripping example. It's a crash which took place, according to Malcolm, because the Korean crew were far too deferential and weren't blunt enough and clear enough about what they were saying.
Yes.
But the lesson of that chapter is really that once they understood, Korean Air understood that their problem was cultural attitudes in the cockpit, they changed them in very, very short order. It's this marvelous example about how, culture is extraordinarily malleable if we put our minds to changing it. It's only rigid and difficult if we ignore it or just leave it in the background.
What surprised me, though, was that you could take adult people and change culture so quickly. That's surprising.
Yeah. And for any of those people listening who are going to be flying on Korean Airlines, I should say that they're now jolly safe, relatively speaking. Anyway, Andrew.
I mean, I don't want to spoil the end, but the real conclusion is there's no such thing as outliers, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's society that sort of constructs all of these things. And the way I read this book, I thought it was quite a brave and subversive book, but possibly the first post-George Bush book that we've seen coming out of the States, because it is actually, it's the opposite of that old sort of right-wing idea of the maverick, the outsider, the self-made man. Yeah. What you're arguing essentially is that, yes, we can, and we can do stuff in society that changes stuff. Is that the case?
Oh, but it was very much a reaction against the last 8 years, where the firmness with which the successful patted themselves on the back over the last 8 years was really quite extraordinary. And I wanted to say, you know what, this is it's uncalled for. I mean, you didn't do it all by yourself. You had all kinds of advantages that we have all, as a society, chosen to obscure. And I think we should make them plain.
So modesty from the successful, please. A little bit more of that, and a little bit more attention in society about how we make the rest of the society more successful.
I think that's quite right.